In this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this adorable Flintstones cake. And like always, my cake tiers are already baked, filled, iced, and they are in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. I have tons of videos showing you how I do that process, and that will be linked in the description. And also, any of the tools that I use and any videos that I reference will be linked in the description as well. And I also separated this video into chapters so you can easily skip around to the parts that you want to see. A little fun fact. Did you know that people in Dubai don't even like the Flintstones? But that's okay because the people of Abu Dhabi do. I am so sorry. You can thank President Steve for that one. So let's get started.
To start, I have Tylose powder mixed into my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant, and I add a little bit of Tylose powder in there. The Tylose powder is going to make it stretchy. It's going to make it so much easier to work with. I will link this in the description. So I got my cake out of the refrigerator. That icing is cold and hard. I'm not going to mess it up. I'm getting a little bit of piping gel along the outside, and then I thin it with a little bit of water. And I rolled out my fondant, and I'm going to cover this. Now, I do have a video where I go into detail on how I cover cakes with fondant, and that will be linked in the description. But I'm just trying to get out all of these wrinkles, and then I'm using my fondant smoother to press that fondant against the board and removing the excess. And now I have some foil here, and I'm just like crumbling it back and forth, and I'm just pressing this into the cake to create a little bit of like a stone pattern. And sometimes this gets a little flat, so what I like to do is like reopen the foil again, and I'm going to just like crumble it again so I get a different pattern. So I'm pressing this against the cake, and remember that cake is still cold because I just removed it from the fridge, so I'm not going to distort the cake as I do this, and I'm going to make sure that I get the top part as well. There is going to be another cake on the very top, so I don't have to do it in the middle. So that looks good. I'm going to put that back in the fridge. Now I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't slide around, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water, and I printed these out the size I wanted them to be. I measured my cake where they're going to go, and I made sure they were the right size. And again, I have Tylose powder mixed into this fondant. I rolled that fondant out really thin and let it sit about 20 minutes before I did this. Now I'm going to show you how I did Bam Bam, and you can kind of get the idea. Sometimes, do you see how I'm drawing past the hair? And I'm kind of like looking beyond the hair to try to figure out where the head is. And I want to make sure that I get all of the inner detail as well. And it can get a little tricky, like with these fingers that are going around that little, what is that, a club? You just have to make sure that you trace as much detail as you can. And I'm figuring out where the body is, so I'm looking past the shorts and figuring out where his leg is, and make sure you trace all the toes and everything. So when I do this trace, cut, and smooth method, sometimes you have to look beyond the picture and try to figure out where you're tracing everything. That's where it can get a little bit confusing. And once I remove the paper, I want to take my Dresden tool and just deepen all of these lines in here. So I have the picture close for reference, just to make sure that I don't forget any of those lines. And then once I have everything done with the Dresden tool, then I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and cut everything out. And once I have that cut out, I'm going to take my fingers and my tools and smooth my cut. So anytime you cut anything out of fondant, you're going to have jagged edges. So you need to take the time and smooth it out and make it look nice and pretty. So that's the trace, cut, and smooth process that I'm going to do for all these pieces. Now I have some white fondant, and I'm going to trace the hair and then the bone onto the fondant, cutting the bone out. And I would take my Dresden tool and just deepen the lines in the hair, deepen the detail, and then I will cut the hair out as well. And it's the same process for all of the pieces in all of the different colors. So I colored all the fondant and rolled it out first and let it sit. And then that way it sets a little harder, and then I can trace all of these on here. It's not dragging. It's pretty stiff. It's not super hard. It's just stiff. So you see how it's not dragging when I cut it with my knife? If your fondant isn't stiff enough, it's going to drag and it's going to be a nightmare. That's why you need that Tylose powder. But I'm just doing it for all of the pieces. Now I have some thin black fondant rolled out as well. And I had to cut this thumb out of here because the thumb is going to go in front of the shorts, so that hand had to be separate from the rest of the piece. I'm getting a little bit of water behind it, and I'm sticking it down on this black piece, and now we have to dress him. So I'm lifting up the hand, and I'm getting the one end of the shorts underneath, and I'm bringing that across, and then just doing the same thing for all of these pieces. Do you see how I have to lift the hand and fit the club in there? and just push it down. So I do have the picture close for reference. That way I can see what it looks like. I'm just trying to make it look like the picture. Now for larger pieces like this, I like to first get it into the correct position. Again, I'm looking at the picture, making sure I get it in the right spot. And then I'm going to lift up little pieces and get a little bit of water underneath it and put it down. And I'll continue to piece this together, keeping the picture close for reference, making it look just like the picture. Now I have an edible marker and I'm just drawing all of these little triangles on here and want to get a little bit of water behind that bone and stick that down. And again, do I even need to say it? I'm making it look like the picture. So having the picture close really does help. I'm just piecing this all together. And then I have a tip. I think that's a tip number 8 or something. And I'm just cutting into the tan fondant and then cutting white pieces out, getting a little bit of water behind it and putting the white down. This way the eyes are flush with the face and they're not sticking out. They won't look weird. And again, taking my edible marker and just adding all of these details. Now I have to make the pupil, so I'm just cutting 2 black circles with a small round piping tip and getting a little bit of water behind them and sticking those down as well. And now I just want to color this in a little bit. So I have some chocolate brown petal dust and I'm just trying to deepen the detail lines that I made, and I'm also going to shade him in a little bit so he just doesn't look so plain and flat. Everybody looks better with a little bit of makeup, right? And then once that's done, I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm going to cut a thin black border around this whole thing. That way it's going to look like it's outlined in black. And then once I have that done, again, I'm going to take my tools and my fingers and smooth those jagged edges of the black fondant to make it look nice and pretty. And then I did the same thing for pebbles. I sped it up because I don't want this video to be super long, but again, I did the body first and then I'm doing all of the little pieces like the hair and the clothing. And then I'm going to start piecing it all together on the black fondant, getting water behind it, using my edible marker to add the details. And here they are. Going to leave them out at room temperature for a couple days to dry flat so they dry stiff. Now I have this gray fondant rolled out about a 1/2 inch thick, and I have this little pebble stone impression mat. So I flipped it over and started on the back because this is going on top of the cake. So I want you to be able to see the texture from both sides. I'm just pressing that into both sides, and now I'm tracing this number 1 on here. Since this already has a texture in it, I don't use my Dresden tool to trace it. I'm doing the pinprick method, so I'm using my needle tool and just pricking little dots all around the outer edge of this, and then I'm going to cut this out. So since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I need to make a guideline cut first, so I'm just sticking the tip of my X-Acto knife in there, and then once that guideline is cut, I stick the tip all the way down to the cutting board and cut it out. By making that guideline, it just prevents you from distorting the top part of the fondant. Now I'm flipping it over and smoothing this out, and you can see that I lost that impression on the back, so I just pressed it back in there again. And I'm using my fingers and my tools just to smooth this out and look nice and pretty, and let's set that aside. And then I did the same thing for Dino, just trace, cut, and smooth to make this entire thing. And again, I didn't want the video to be super long, so I sped this up, but I show my trace, cut, and smooth method in so many of my videos. And I'm going to set him aside to dry at room temperature flat for a couple days. Now I need to make the top part of the house, so I'm getting down some cornstarch and I'm going to roll this fondant out really long, cut a straight edge on the bottom. Then I'm getting my cake out of the refrigerator, and I need to wrap this around here. I did it pretty thick. I want the top tier, the tier that's going on top of it, to cover that middle section. You'll see what I mean. So I'm getting a little piping gel down and pressing this down, and I'm making sure it's coming over the cake. That way the cake on top is going to cover that little seam, like I just said. And then I'm just wrapping this around here, trying to make it go over the top of the cake. And then where it meets, I'm just using my X-Acto knife to cut through both pieces of fondant, removing the fondant behind it. And then I'm smoothing this all down, getting rid of the wrinkles just to get this in place before I glue it down. Now, the good thing about this is a stone house, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Some of my fondant's sticking out a little lower. It's not perfectly straight, but I thought that was okay because it gives it a little bit more character, if you will. So once I get that in place, I'm getting a little bit of piping gel underneath it. Do you see how I'm lifting up the pieces and getting piping gel under? That way I can get it in place and not mess it up. Now I'm doing the same thing with the foil. I'm crinkling it and then pressing it down into the top. You can see this cake is a little soft. I don't want to press too hard and distort the cake, but I'm just trying to get this impression in here. And when you press it too many times, like I said before, the foil gets flat, so I keep redoing it or re-scrunching the foil so I get a different pattern. And just getting a little bit of water underneath that entire bottom section, making sure this is stuck to the cake. And again, just adding a little bit more texture here before I finish. And that looks good. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now I want to airbrush my topper. So I'm going to get a skewer in here. You want to twist it in there like a screw. You don't want to just jam it in there. You don't want to distort the fondant. That's why I roll the fondant out really thick so I can get a skewer in there, making sure it's not poking out the front or the back. Now I have my airbrush gun. I have some airbrush coloring. You can only use airbrush coloring in an airbrush gun. I'm starting on the back, so this is going on top of the cake. You'll be able to see it from the back, so I want to airbrush the back and the front. So I'm just kind of going around the edges on this, and I flip it right side up and I do the edges first, and then I'm going to add a little more detail in the middle. Less is more when it comes to airbrushing. Like once you add too much, you can't take it away. So I like to do thin coats and do a little bit at a time. I still want some of that light gray to show through here. So once I get the black around the edges, then I'll color it in a little bit, and I'm going over some of those lines just to deepen that stone detail. But again, I'm just trying to make sure that you can still see some of the light gray through this airbrushing. That way it'll give it a little bit of dimension. And that looks good. I'm going to set that aside to dry for a few days. Now I got that out of the refrigerator. I'm going to airbrush this as well. So I'm airbrushing a little black all around the bottom edge, and then right underneath the edge of the top piece that I put on. And then I'm going to slowly color it in like I did before. I want to hold the airbrush gun away, and I'm kind of moving in a circular motion. And I want to make sure, again, like I said about the topper, that you could still see some of this light gray through the airbrushing. So do light coats, do a light coat, stop, take a look at it, and then come back and deepen the detail if you want. Now I'm getting a little closer to the cake and just going into some of these deep impressions that were made by the foil just to make it look a little bit more realistic, and that looks good. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now I'm making the door. So I have my little ribbon cutter. I'm not pressing all the way down. I'm just transferring the lines here. This way I can get even lines rather than freehanding it. And then I'm going to take my Dresden tool and just deepen all of these lines. And then I'm making little marks on the side and on the top in the middle. And I'm just trying to make this a curve so it's even on both sides, just freehanding this. You can always use like a circle cutter if you want. And then I'm taking my Dresden tool and just adding some lines in here so it looks like wood, and cutting this out, making it a little shorter, rolling out some gray fondant. I'm pinching it to give it like a stone look and wrapping it around here, cutting off the excess. And then I'm rolling this out, and I want to wrap this around this circle here. This is going to be the windows. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm pinching it, and I'm going to wrap it around here, cut a piece off, and where it meets, I'm going to cut another piece and then press it together. So I'm going to do this twice because Fred's going to be in one window and Wilma's going to be in another. So I'm going to pinch the fondant to give it a stone look to it, and then wrap it around that little circle cutter and trim it to fit. And now I want to make the little steps. So I'm making sure that these steps go in between the door. I don't want them coming all the way out to the frame. So I'm making one pretty long, and then I'm going to do a smaller one on top of it. So I just kind of trace that one on there, and I want to make sure that I make this one a little shorter so it'll look like steps going up to the door. And this will make sense as I put it together. But I want to make it look like stone again. So I'm just taking my fingers and pinching it to make it look not perfect and give it a little bit of texture. And now I want to airbrush all of these. So I'm turning this, I have them on paper towel so I can easily turn it around. And I'm first getting all of the inner and outer edges of all of these pieces. And then once I have the edges done, I can add a little color in the middle. Again, making sure that I still leave some of that light gray showing through. And now I got that out of the refrigerator, and let's assemble this. So I'm putting the door on the very front, and then getting a little bit of water behind that piece and putting that around there. And then I'm getting piping gel underneath these steps. And then I did print edible images. I have videos where I show you how I print edible images, and I'll link that below. But I used a round cutter just to cut those perfect circles out, get a little bit of piping gel behind each one. And I'm sticking this to a gray piece of fondant. And I didn't have a cutter that was the same size, so I had to use my X-Acto knife to cut them out. And then I'm getting a little bit of piping gel behind each one. And I want to make sure that these are equidistant. So I'm going to also take my ruler and make sure that they are the same space away from the door. And then I'm going to put the frames on by getting some piping gel behind each piece. And then I felt like they looked a little too light, so I just got my airbrush gun and I'm just deepening the detail a little bit in these frames. And how cool is that? I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now I'm stacking the cake. I do have a video where I go into detail on how I stack cakes, and I'm going to link that in the description, but just getting down some buttercream and straws and doweling the whole thing so it stays, so it doesn't fall over, and that's all in that video. Now I want to make the ribbon, so I rolled that blue fondant out really long, and then I'm getting a little bit of water around the edge, and I'm going to fold this in, and it's just going to give it like a different finished look. And I'm doing the same thing on the other side. I'm folding it in after putting some water down. I'm going to flip it right side up, get a little bit more water down, and then just folding it in like this. So it's not just like a straight piece of fondant. So you see how it has a little bit of detail in there. It's just a little different way to wrap it with the fondant ribbon. And getting a little bit of piping gel where it meets in the back, just pressing the seam together and using my palette knife to press everything down so it is nice and straight and pretty. Now making the bone, roll that into a ball, and then in the middle, I'm going to pinch this kind of as I roll it, and then putting it down on the counter and rolling it, pressing down in the middle so the ends are a little bigger. And then I'm going to take my Dresden tool and press in the middle of these, trying to make this bone shape. I should really get a mold. I make so many bones that I should have a mold, but whatever. Anyway, this way works. And you see how I'm just trying to separate those pieces a little bit, roll it out a little longer, and just make it look like a bone. And then I'm going to get a little bit of piping gel behind it and press that. It's a little off to the side, and then I just wrap that piece around it as well. And now I'm making the sash. So I'm freehanding this. So I curved it at the bottom. I'm cutting in on an angle up the sides, and then I go over to my cake and no, that's too big. I need to cut it again. So I went back and forth a couple times until I got it to the correct shape. Now, so you see how I'm bending it over the cake. I'm marking it. I need to cut right there, and then I cut it. So I'm a little out of frame. I'm cutting 2 lines in here. This way the bone is going to fit through there. So I got a little bit of water behind it, and I'm sticking it down to the cake, and then I need to make these lines a little longer so the bone will fit. And then don't kill me, I'm out of frame again, but I'm cutting this bone in half, and I cut it on an angle. That way it's going to slide behind here and kind of look like the bone is going through. So I'm holding it up there. I need something to anchor it in there. So I'm putting toothpicks down into the cake, and then I'm going to hook the bone on here because this is pretty heavy and I just want to make sure it doesn't fall off. So you see how I got some piping gel behind it and how it comes to like a little taper in the middle, and I stuck it down. Now I need to make the triangles. I have black fondant rolled out really thin, and I'm just freehanding these, and I'm trying to do different shapes of triangles so there's a variation. And then going over to my cake and getting a little bit of water behind all of these and putting all of these down. And that looks really nice. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. And now I have a video where I show you in detail on how I do fondant names. It's the same trace, cut, and smooth method that will be linked in the description. Now I'm making the palm trees. Press a wet skewer into some fondant and roll it in my hands. I'm going to roll it on the countertop. Carefully taking my X-Acto knife and just trimming the excess off the end. I want to make sure there's still skewer in there because the skewer is going to go into the cake. Taking my Dresden tool just to make these lines. It kind of looks like a Tootsie Roll, but it's a palm tree trunk. But anyway. And then I want to cut out a bunch of leaves, and I'm sorry my stupid hand's in the way, but I'm cutting into these leaves just to give it like a palm leaf look, if you will. And then I got my cake out of the refrigerator, and I'm going to decorate this. So I'm putting toothpicks on either side of the skewer. That way it's not going to turn or twist as I put it into the cake. And just holding Dino next to the one and seeing where I want to put the one, getting some icing underneath that number 1. That's the same color of the tier that it's going on. And I'm just going to slide this down, making sure that it's perfectly vertical. And then some of the icing is going to seep out, so I'm just taking a dry paintbrush and removing that. And then I'm holding Dino up there and seeing where he's touching the one. I'm going to get a little bit of icing behind there and then just push that on. And again, the icing is going to seep out, so I'm going to take a dry paintbrush and remove it. And then I'm going to hold these pieces up and see where I wanted it to go. Those names dried straight, so I needed it to rest on something. So I think I'm going to just rest it on the bone. I think it'll look best. But I do that all the time. I hold up the pieces, see where it's going to look best, and figure out where I'm going to put everything. I'm getting some icing behind her, just where she's touching the cake. I don't have her flat against the cake, so you don't want icing all behind there. And the same for the name, getting a little bit of icing down and pressing that on. And then I'm going to do the same thing for him. So do you see how I'm using the same color icing as the tier that I'm putting it on, and just have icing behind where he's touching the cake? And then I take my dry paintbrush and just remove any excess that you can see. And now I want to make the stones. I have 3 colors here, and I'm kind of twisting it to marble it together to give it just a little bit of visual interest, I guess, and just ripping a piece off, rolling it in my hands, and kind of like squeezing it into different stone shapes. And then I'm going to set those aside. Now let's decorate the cake drum. So I have some piping gel here, and I want to get piping gel all on the cake drum because I'm going to put some sand down here, and I need this sand to stick to it. Just making sure I get all the way to the edges. Don't leave any space without piping gel on it. You just want it to stick to all of this. And then I'm going to stick the stones down. I just did random clusters of them, and then I have some light brown sugar, a really tiny spoon, and I'm just spooning some of this on here. You can use cookies, like sugar cookies or whatever you want, anything that's a sand color. But do you see how I'm trying to fill in all of the gaps and making sure that it goes all the way to the edge? So I want all of that silver board covered with that brown sugar, and I'm getting a little bit of non-toxic glue around the outer edge and on the back of that ribbon, and then I'm going to wrap the ribbon around where it meets in the back. Just get a little more glue down and press that down just to make it look nice and polished. I'm getting some piping gel underneath that little palm tree trunk or the Tootsie Roll and sticking that down, and doing the same thing on the top on the left side. And then I want to get these leaves on, so I'm getting a little bit of icing down first. The icing, I'm trying to stick it to the cake as I'm pressing the leaf in. I don't know, I thought it might stick a little better with icing. So I started with some icing, and then I didn't want those leaves to droop, so I got some piping gel behind it. And then I stuck the leaves to the cake, and they were still falling a little bit too much, so I have half a toothpick that I just stuck underneath there so I can let these leaves rest on there so they're not going to just droop all the way down. That was my little solution to that. I think it worked out pretty good. And then I'm just going to keep adding these leaves on here. I started using piping gel behind the leaves that are on top so the icing wasn't seeping out. And I just did about 5 or 6 leaves for this one, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other palm tree. And here is the cake. How cool is that?
So there you go. How adorable is this cake? I just had so much fun making this one. Now this cake on the inside, the top tier is a 2-layer torted 5-inch. The middle tier is a 2-layer torted 7-inch. And the bottom tier is a 2-layer torted 9-inch, and it feeds about 50 to 60 people. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have ebooks with all of my favorite recipes. I have my signature scratch pound cake recipes, my best Dr. Cake mix recipes, all of my buttercream icing and filling recipes, along with my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts. So they will all be linked in the description. And I do have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. All of that information is in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake, have fun, and yabba dabba doo. That was so corny. I will see you on the next one. Bye.